What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Sacred Men podcast. This YouTube channel exists to build strong Christian men in a weak world. And of course, I'm your host, Pastor Justin Dean, and I have spent the past 2 decades discipling men from the wrestling room to church and a whole lot of places in between. Today, I'm dressed up a little bit because I've been teaching Old Testament to our junior high students here at New City Classical Academy. School started back this week, and I'm excited to do it. And this video today, I want to talk about virtue. And I was reminded, I was at jiu-jitsu and I've met a guy there, and we've been talking classical education and forming men and discipleship and and virtue and manhood and these things. And he sent me a article by Russell Kirk. And there was part of the article that I was like, I think I've read this before. And then we started dialoguing about virtue and what it is and, and why it's needed and how to develop it and all this kind of stuff. And then I was reminded of a book that I've read by Peter Kreeft called Back to Virtue. And then another book that I read by Alistair McIntyre called After Virtue. And both of those books were really formative for me, probably a decade ago when I first read them. And I opened up Back to Virtue, and the introduction was from Russell Kirk. And it was basically a few paragraphs of the article that he had sent me. And so I was like, okay, that's why it resonated with me. And so I just started thinking more about virtue, what virtue is, how it's developed. And I started thinking about these 2 guys, Peter Kreeft and Russell Kirk. And I thought, you know what? I want to do kind of a deep dive on virtue. I want to do it in multiple different areas. I'm going to do it here on the Sacred Men podcast. I'm going to go actually chapter by chapter through After Virtue with the guys on the Sacred City Life podcast. So you can look at there. But unfortunately, when I say the word virtue, you might not be, turned on by that. You might not be motivated by that. That might not, stir you up very much, but it really should, because virtue is what makes a man truly powerful, right? Now, I know when you hear the word virtue, you might hear some kind of watered down, effeminate, you might think self-help seminars, but the real virtue is manly strength that gets the right stuff done for those we love, right? Manly strength, that's my definition. Manly strength that gets the right stuff done for those we love. And to talk about this, we're going to draw, of course, on these 2 intellectual giants. Peter Kreeft, the Catholic philosopher who calls us back to virtue in an age of moral confusion. And Russell Kirk, he is often called the father of modern conservatism. And he reminds us that virtue isn't invented. It's rediscovered from the old ways. So the calling isn't to be revolutionaries. The calling isn't to go out and rediscover something. The calling is actually to go back to the old ways. It is rediscovery, but it's not invention. So we're not inventing something new. We're going back to the old ways. And here's the reality. If you are like me and you are feeling the pull of distraction, the pull of relativism, the pull, or just absolutely exhausted and worn out, that this episode is meant to be some smelling salts for your soul. If you've ever seen a guy in a fight or a guy before he's about to make a big lift and they put that smelling salt, it wakes him up. It turns on his nervous system and he's ready to go. And hopefully that's what this podcast will do for us. So first up, let's talk Peter Kreeft. This guy is a professor, an author. He's been an unapologetic defender of Christian wisdom. And in his book, Back to Virtue, he doesn't mince words. He cuts right to the quick. He says, virtue is not an optional add-on for a comfortable life. In fact, if your only goal in life is to be comfortable, then you will never develop virtue. Because virtue is the health and strength of your soul. Think about it. The soul that is virtuous is the soul that is healthy and strong able to do the right thing at the right time, right? Think about, you're fit to, in order to get physically healthy and physically strong, we know you need to eat right. You need to hit the gym, right? That's going to build your strength. That's going to build your ability to use that strength to provide and protect for your family. Well, virtue is the strength and the health for your inner man. Without virtue, you are spiritually flabby and weak. You're going to be prone to every vice the world throws at you. And we're going to talk about these in more detail, but when we talk about the virtues, we often contrast them with vices, right? The things that destroy us. And the reality is, we know physical training is of some value, but who cares if you can deadlift 500 pounds? Who cares if you are, you can hit, a target with your AR 200 yards out. If you get tripped up by the first temptation that comes your way, that physical strength, that physical training is no value if you haven't trained your soul, if you haven't become a virtuous person, right? And so that's what this is about. It's about developing virtue, developing inner strength, developing a healthy soul that's strong, that can choose to do what is good for your people and not choose to do a vice that could destroy you and destroy your people. All right. Now, the word virtue, this is kind of interesting. It comes from the Latin virtus, which means manly strength. Now, most people, when they hear the word virtue, they only think of character. They only think of maybe integrity, but they don't think manly strength. And that's where the actual word comes from. And Kreeft, he hammers this home. It's not about being nice or passive. He's got this quote about Jesus, and who of course is our definition of the virtuous man. This is who we want to emulate. This is who we want to become like. And Kreeft says this, quote, "Why have we reduced him to meek and gentle Jesus? Because we have reduced all the virtues to one, being kind, and we measure Jesus by our standards instead of measuring our standards by him." And that one made me want to jump up and shout and run around my office, right? We've reduced all the virtues to one, being kind, or I would say being nice. And then we judge Jesus by that standard instead of judging our standard our standard by Jesus, because Jesus was not nice. Was he kind? Yes, he was kind, but he also used very strong speech. He called people names. He did very masculine things. He was a very, he had a lot of strength of soul. He had no problem with confrontation. He had no problem telling somebody they were wrong. And he had no problem putting his face forward and doing the really difficult, hard thing, even when his own disciples were wanting him to take the easy way out. And so Jesus is our standard. And virtue, it isn't primarily about being kind. And it's definitely not about our comfort or what makes us most comfortable. And we need this today because in an era where basically anything goes, rediscovering virtue and building virtue is actually kind of revolutionary. In one sense, it's the only rebellion left, right? You can color your hair blue. They think you can change your gender. You can sleep around. You can do all this kind of stuff. There is no real rebellion in our culture left. The only rebellion is actually to go back to the old ways, right? And become a virtuous man. And so in that sense, developing virtue is the rebel yell against moral weakness and moral chaos. And Kreeft goes on, he breaks it down. And of course, the classic virtues. And there's the four cardinal virtues. If you've heard those words before, we'll probably end up doing a podcast on each of these. But it's justice, wisdom, often called prudence, courage, and moderation, often called self-control. And then he talks about the three theological virtues: faith, hope, and love. right? He's going to talk about all three of those. So let's kind of unpack those quickly for us. Justice, that's doing right by your family, doing right by your brothers in Christ, doing right by your community, right? No shortcuts, no excuses. Wisdom, that is prudence in action, making the tough calls without rushing into anger or rushing into foolishness. Courage, that's the steel in our spine, right? That's the backbone, standing firm when the world and everybody else tells you to fold, whether it's defending your faith or leading your household through hard times. Moderation, this is self-control. This is keeping your attitudes in check. This is keeping your foot on the neck of the old man. This is not returning, if you were with us on Sunday, not returning to the trash can and eating out of the trash can, but pursuing the goodness and the righteousness. We could say goodness, truth, and beauty, pursuing those things and not the trash that the world offers us. And the three, of course, we want to develop this self-control so we don't get derailed by booze, by screens, or whatever else this weak culture is tempting us with. Because virtue, it really does take decades to develop virtue. And unfortunately, it can take moments to destroy virtue. That engaging in a vice, pursuing sin, doing something weak men would do, that can cut our knees out from under us. It can ruin our reputation. It can ruin our legacy. Obviously, we can lose our jobs. It ruins our testimony. It ruins the ability to lead because it'll take out our confidence. And so virtue is built slow. It's built over the long haul, and it can be lost really quickly, right? And so that just should make us really aware of how important this battle is that we're in. Now, Kreeft goes on to warn us that basically we've lost virtue because we chase pleasure and comfort over principle. I don't even think I need an analogy for this because it's everywhere. We want to do what makes us happy. We want to do in a circumstantial way, in a right now way, instead of pursuing what would make us eternally happy or make us happy 40 years down the road looking back. And so we pursue stupid things and we choose comfort over doing the hard, difficult things. And he says, honesty, a key virtue, it demands, if you're going to be an honest person, if you're going to be a truthful person, it demands sacrifice. You've got to will and desire the truth with your whole heart, right? You got to want truth more than almost anything else. And for men today, that means us owning our mistakes, leading with integrity at work, being the rock that your wife and your kids need. Personal virtue, Kreeft argues, is the key to fixing our world. And this is one of the reasons why I'm drawn back to it, because the government can't fix anything if it doesn't start here. The government is only as good as its citizens. And Kreeft goes back to the basics and he says, the basics are, we need virtuous people. Specifically for this podcast, we need virtuous men. It's the key to fixing our world. It's the key to transforming our families. It's the key for transforming our city. It's the key for transforming our nations. Virtue. So that means for us, we need to start with ourselves. Start with ourselves, develop virtue, and then the ripple effects of that will affect society. If you don't have virtue, if you're not a virtuous man, you are part of the problem. You're letting civilization slide into weakness, right? So Peter Kreeft focuses more on the personal aspects of virtue. And I think if you want to know more about that, you should definitely pick up the book and read it. I'm sure it's on audiobook. We'll go into some detail on the Sacred City Life podcast. Now we're going to shift to Russell Kirk. He's the conservative thinker who saw virtue as the glue holding society together. Kirk wasn't about trendy ideologies, all the, the new things that are flashing on our Twitter feeds. He was about a return to tradition, order, and the permanent things. In his essay that my buddy sent me, Virtue, Can It Be Taught? He asks, a great question. Can virtue really be taught? And what he's meaning by that is, could we just teach it in our schools? Can we just read it in a book and learn how to be virtuous? And his answer is kind of yeah and no. Yes, it can be taught, but in one word we could say it's usually more caught than taught. It can't be just taught in a classroom lecture. Moral virtue comes, and this is key. This is a key principle for Kirk. Moral virtue comes from habits that are usually formed early in life. Formed in your family, formed in your church, formed in your neighborhood, formed in the circle of men who shaped you, right? So he's getting to this point that it's caught more than taught. I can't tell you how many things that my football coach and my wrestling coach instilled in me and drilled in me that it seems like nothing can take them out of me. This is just one simple example, but I remember my coach telling us that, we have to outwork our opponents. We have to work harder than our opponents if we want to beat our opponents. And this idea that he would always talk about is, what is your opponent doing right now? What is he doing right now? Is he resting right now? Is he getting a drink of water right now? Is he going home and playing video games right now? And he built this thing up where it's like, where I would leave practice and, get some water in me. And then I would go and do another workout at the YMCA. And I was, on Thanksgiving, I'd eat a little bit of Thanksgiving meal, and then I would go for a run. And I would constantly have this question in my head: what is the other guy doing? What is my opponent doing right now? And my goal was to outwork him. So then when I got on the mat, I had the virtue, I had the ability, the manly strength that I needed to accomplish my goal, right? So this was formed by my coaches, right? Like, my coaches formed me in this. And I recently had a guy at jiu-jitsu say that he'd spent a lot of time with some guys from our church. And he just commented on, he didn't use the word virtue, but what he was describing was the manly virtue of these men, their leadership ability, their character, their integrity, the way they led their family. He was saying these men are virtuous, and that says something about your church. And it was a huge evidence of grace. And of course, they've been taught a lot of stuff about manhood. They've been taught a lot of stuff about discipline and all these different things. But that has been caught as much as it's been taught, just by being around other godly men who are pursuing Jesus, who are pursuing virtue, developing these virtues in their own life, and we're learning from each other. And so Kirk says it's basically more caught than taught, right? You have to live it. You have to learn it and live it, and you can't just read about it. And Kirk, he calls virtue the energy of the soul employed for the general good. The energy of the soul employed for the general good. So it's not selfish. Like guys like Andrew Tate, they have this faux masculinity, but they're not virtuous men, right? They're inherently selfish men. And so that is a braggadocious, kind of negative view. He's not a virtuous man, right? He's not a good man. He's an incredibly selfish man. So it's about building something bigger than us, right? It's about leaving a legacy. It's about, think about it. What we're striving for, we want to build a family, obviously, that outlasts us. We want to build virtuous kids that outlast us. We want to build a school that outlasts us, that helps us in this process of raising up dragon slayers, raising up virtuous men and women. We want to build a church, right, that outlasts us. We want to build a city that outlasts us, right? That's what we're striving for. That's what virtuous men strive for. We're building something bigger than just our own comfort, than our own pleasure. And Kirk says basically that we need to seek out the old virtues from Western civilization. And we need to bring them back out, and we need to rediscover them, kind of like King Josiah in the Old Testament, who they've rediscovered the Word of God, and they opened up the Word of God, and they realized what they had forgotten and what they missed, and they wanted to reform society based on the old ways. That's what we need to do. We need to rediscover virtue and bring them back into the light. And that's something unique for us because in our culture, specifically progressives, think of the word progressive. They're trying to constantly progress and move, and they're basically moving on into new ideologies, in new utopian ideas of the way that they're going to create some kind of perfect classless society where everyone, has the same salary and they're all everybody's got an equal outcome in life. What Kirk is saying is, no, we don't need anything new like that. Like with the world burning with radical change, Kirk says, no, don't set fire to it all. Don't go along with those. We need to actually go back and revive the timeless strengths, revive the old virtues. And prudence is huge for Kirk. He thinks it's the chief virtue. He thinks it's the cause of the other virtues. And for men, think of prudence as wise dealing, as strategic thinking. It's the ability to weigh, it's wisdom, right? It's the ability to weigh actions carefully, not just like impulsively, charging ahead. We love adrenaline and we love masculinity and we love testosterone. And if a battle needs to be fought, we're going to be the first in and the last out. That's the kind of men we want to be. But we don't want to blindly rush into conflict, right? We want to be able to weigh our options and not to count the cost. We want to be able to count the cost before stepping into it and use wisdom. And then, of course, he ties it again to the classical and theological virtues too: faith, hope, and love, alongside courage and justice. But again, Kirk he's skeptical on whether or not schools can didactically teach this, right? You can't just cram virtue down people's throats. Real virtue comes from example. It comes from stories. This is one of the ways the Greeks and the Romans taught virtue. This is what all their epics about. All their epics are about virtue and vice, right? And they're trying to create a certain type of man by giving him a story, giving him an ideal, giving him a character. And so he can say, okay, that is good. That's virtuous. I need to become more like that. I need to shape my life like that. I need to shape my appetites like that. I need to become strong on the inside like that. It comes from fathers, teaching sons, and not just like sitting down teaching, but son, come with me. Watch me do this hard thing. Watch me mow the grass when it's 100 degrees out, right? Watch me do it with joy and not complaining. It comes from communities like churches, missional communities, upholding these standards, our kids being a part of them, us being a part of them, and we're all shaping each other together, right? We're building virtue together. So I want you to think about this, fellas. In Kirk's view, in our culture today, we've become acclimated to disorder. We've begun to feel at home in a world without fences. We can think about it. We can watch anything we want. We can pretty much go anywhere we want to go. We can do pretty much anything we want to do. And Kirk says that's part of the problem, right? That freedom, that's a negative freedom. That freedom is part of the problem. He says freedom without virtue turns into immorality. Freedom without virtue turns into immorality. So if I have all this freedom, but I don't have the virtue to be able to choose wisely inside this freedom, then my freedom will inevitably lead me to choose wicked things, vices that will ultimately destroy me and destroy society. I mean, just think about it with pornography, right? Like you can click on pornography anytime you want and you can look at whatever you want. And that kind of freedom, that freedom of the internet, that kind of freedom without virtue leads us to destruction. And when he's thinking about this, he asks the question, he's like, are there men possessed of virtue sufficient to withstand and repel the forces of disorder at large in our culture today? Are there men that can push back against the darkness? Are there men with this amount of freedom that have the virtue already developed that can choose wisely and act wisely in the midst of our culture today? And by and large, the answer is no. And we need to be the people of virtue who can push back. We need to develop the virtue. We need to help our children develop the virtue. I was thinking about this when he was asking this question. I was just thinking about all of the chaos that surrounded the founding of our country, right? That was a very chaotic time. And the answer to that chaos was virtuous men, right? If you go back and look at the founding fathers, the majority of them were outstanding, virtuous men, right? I could go through them all, but I'm not going to go through them all. You probably know them. They were men big enough, strong enough, with the strength of virtue to meet the moment in their day and age. And they did something great. And I would say, well, where are those virtuous men today? And I would say they're few and far between, but I believe that's what God's calling us to be. That's you and me. And not that we claim to be those virtuous men. I would never, but we're working towards it, right? We're becoming it. We're on the path. That it's a goal and it's a path. And as we're walking the path, we're becoming those types of men. We're striving to become those types of men. Whether or not we'll ever become virtuous, like we can get to a place where we say we're virtuous, I don't know, but we're on the path and we're striving to become that. I want us, though, to become the men who could say we served God's purposes in our generation. Like the darkness rose up, the darkness pushed back, and the Spirit of God inside of us and all of our will, like all of our soul, we worked hard, we developed virtue, and we stood up and we met the moment, right? We became men that could meet the moment in our day and age. Many people wish they were born back then or wish they were born 50 years ago, 100 years ago. Man, you were born for today. And yes, our society is in ruins. Our society is in chaos, but great men are built for those situations, right? And those situations can make great men. So the time is now for us to pursue virtue and develop virtue so we can be God's men for this moment. And of course, it's not going to happen unless we want it to happen. It's not going to happen unless we ask God for it to happen. It's not going to happen unless we pursue it, right? Virtue isn't learned by watching a YouTube video, right? It's not learned just by reading a book. It's not learned by taking a class on virtue. It's learned by practice, right? We restore virtue by living it. That means we're going to fight and argue and defend our principles. We're going to be men of courage. We're going to cultivate habits of self-discipline, and we're going to pass those disciplines on. We're going to pass those habits on to our friends, our missional community, the men in our fight club, to our children. And one of the things that Kirk talks kind of a lot about, it's very easy for us to take a status of a victim and say, everything sucks because our government sucks. Like government is the problem. And government is a problem, but government is not our main enemy. Kirk says our own moral laziness is. Our moral laziness is the problem. In other words, our lack of virtue, right? Our lack of virtue. That there's something about many American men that want to sit back, complain about the government, and have somebody else change, somebody else fix the problem, instead of actually becoming virtuous men that raise up other virtuous men around them, that eventually some of those virtuous men take positions of power and change the culture, right? That's what is meant to happen, right? So as I close here, how do Kreeft and Kirk kind of come together and align for us men? Well, both of them see virtue as manly strength rooted in tradition and faith. So the Western tradition and faith. And Kreeft's kind of revolutionary call meets Kirk's prudent revival. Together they're saying, stop drifting and return to the old ways. Go back to the old paths. In a culture that's pushing weakness, pushing endless distractions, pushing eroded families, pushing moral relativism, virtue is our strength. Virtue is kind of both our armor against that, and it's also our weapon to go on the offensive. When I think about virtue, of course I think about Jesus, right? And Jesus can sometimes be for some of us, it's like too high, too lofty of an example, because we kind of think, oh, well, I'll never be Jesus, even though the promise is he's making us into his image from one degree of glory to another as we behold the glory of God in the face of Christ. But when I think of virtue, man, I think of Maximus. I think of Maximus from Gladiator. And of course, that's pagan virtue, or we could call it natural virtue. So that's the development of the virtues just in his natural strength, without the theological virtues and without the Spirit of God in him. But it's still virtue. It's still virtue just the same. And what I'm calling you to, and I think God is calling us to, and Peter Kreeft is calling us to, and Russell Kirk is calling us to, is becoming Christian Maximuses, right? That's what we're talking about. Having that inner strength, having that strength of soul to be virtuous men in the face of moral chaos and societal chaos. And for me, that pumps me up, right? And Christian virtue isn't less than that. It's more than that, right? It's not less than that. It's more. So imagine this. You are the leader of your home following Christ. You are embodying courage by facing fears head on. You are modeling justice by providing adequately for your family, and you're disciplining your children when they need to discipline them, when they need to be disciplined. You are making sure they're respecting their mother, and that you and your wife are disciplining them well, not provoking them. You're embodying justice. You are embodying prudence by planning wisely, planning your finances, planning to provide and meet the needs, planning for the family vacation, planning for your kids' education, making sure that they're getting a Christian education, and so they're getting a Christian worldview. You're doing all of this. That's prudence, right? Managing your own household well. That's prudence. You're modeling faith by fighting the good fight, right? By focusing on eternal things, by making sure your church, your kids are in church, your family is in church, worshiping the one true God week in and week out. That's faith, right? You've got hope. Your hope in the second coming of Christ, your hope in the power of the gospel, your hope in the power of the Spirit within you. That gives you perseverance. So when the going gets tough, when you've got, tough jobs and difficult relationships and tough financial times, you still keep grinding. You still keep moving forward. And of course, the highest of all of these virtues is love. And that is sacrificially giving yourself to others, right? Joyfully putting your family before yourself without resentment. Loving your wife like Christ loved the church. Discipling your kids in the fear and admonition of the Lord. serving your church family, serving your brothers and sisters in Christ, love leading the way. Now, of course, when I lay that out like that, we know it's not easy. This is why Kreeft talks about sacrifice, why Kirk talks about habits, because both of them are necessary. So how do we start? How do we start developing virtue? Obviously, you got to start small. I would say, read their books, join a church, join a missional community, read your Bible and pray daily. Get a group of dudes around you that help you be a better man, that inspire, that they are more virtuous than you, and they pull you upward and into that. And then eventually you can start, iron sharpening iron. You could start helping them grow in other areas as well. The goal here is to build virtue, build the soul strength for the good fight that we might not be able to fight right now. We might not be virtuous men right now, but if we don't start training now, we'll never be able to fight in the future. And some of us, we've got 10, 20 years under our belt. We need to get in the fight. We need to get in the fight. We need to push back darkness, and we need to develop other men and sharpen our kids like arrows so they can be sent out into the world. And then this is not easy. This is difficult, but when you are living a virtuous life and you're pursuing virtue, when you lay your head down on your pillow at night, absolutely exhausted, thank God for the man that he is making you into and for the responsibilities and the duties he has placed on your shoulders, right? Remember, responsibility is a gift and it's a stewardship, right? Leadership is basically responsibility, right? You take responsibility for something and then you do your best and you ask God's help and you repent when you make mistakes. And we do it with joy and we thank him. We thank him for the gift because he's making us more virtuous as we steward those gifts well, right? He's building our soul strength as we carry heavy weights together. Well, that's it for today on Sacred Men. Now, I want to remind you, September 6th, I think, that Saturday, whatever that is, September 6th, I think is what it is. We are doing our men's ruck. We're going to meet at the church at 6:45 a.m. We're going to leave promptly at 7 a.m. We're going to put some weight on our back. My backpack will probably be 30 pounds. And we're going to walk an hour out and we're going to walk an hour back. Should be about 6.5 miles. Well, if you're walking with me, it'll be about 6.5 miles. I go about a 3.2 mile pace. You can walk slower, you can walk faster, you can carry less weight, you can carry more weight. But we're going to bear our own load and we're going to help each other bear our burdens. And we're going to do this together, build some camaraderie, hopefully build some inner virtue as well. So join us on that Saturday in September. We would love to have anybody come out. And that's it, man. I hope this podcast gets you fired up. Share it. If it did, share it with a brother who needs it. I would really appreciate it if you liked the video so that more people can find us. You can check out Kreeft's Back to Virtue and Kirk's essays. I'll try to put the links in the show notes. Remember, men, virtue isn't optional. It's your calling. Forge it daily. Until next time, stay strong and act like men.